Hi, this is Nick Fromlock from Starver, Pennsylvania. I play at Saxon Golf Course, and this is Golf Smarter, episode 974.
I know a story about John Madden that really isn't being told very much. I was reading all these obituaries about the Ace Hardware ads and the light beer ads and leaving the Raiders sidelines after 10 years and every big moment in John Madden's life. But nowhere in any of these obituaries do I see word one about the longest single career of his life, which was morning radio in the Bay Area. And I thought, well, somebody has to tell that story. I look around, I go, well, Gene Nelson's been kind of out of the picture for years. Frank Dill's not going to write a piece. Al Hart's dead. Guess it's me. What I didn't know really well was the KYA Gene Nelson part. As I was kind of scraping around looking for information, I ran across your podcast episode where you talked about meeting John at the radio station, about your conversations, where you played one of the answering machine messages that recorded for you and Joanne. Shamelessly, dude, I scraped some of that, put it in the article, and quoted you because, I knew you'd be okay with it. It hit me that I had a trusted friend, somebody I could come to who did know some of the origin myth of John Madden on morning radio.
Mornings with Madden, our radio lives with an American legend, featuring the author, my friend Stan Bunger.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome to the Golf Smarter podcast, Stan.
Fred, great to be here. I mean, I'm honored. I know you've done something like 7,500 episodes.
And you're 7,501. I'm
glad to be for it.
Well, it's kind of weird that we're doing this, but I have to do it. Let's establish right from the beginning that we've been friends for 50 years. Are we really going on 50 years?
Pretty darn close to it. And I'm not sure that we've actually appeared 49. On broadcasts together since we were appearing on the same broadcast together as students at San Francisco State University.
Well, don't even call it a broadcast because it was only over cable to the dorms. I was the morning DJ at San Francisco State's radio station. This is 1975, 76, 77. And you were my morning news guy. So we were there at 6 a.m. and you were doing news and I was doing records.
And we thought we were that. We thought we were all that.
Yeah. Yeah. We were so impressed with ourselves. And here we are. And a long time later, and we have one other thing in common that is why you're here today. And that is John Madden. And I've told stories about my relationship with Madden on the show. Episode 800, I think I told a lot of stories. And then when John passed away, I probably did some more. But you have just published a book called Mornings with Madden, My Radio Life with an American Legend. Let me do the golf part real quick, okay. And we'll get into more golf later. You and I were out on the golf course, 2 years ago?
3 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, a couple years ago, post-COVID. We were playing one of my favorite courses, Corica Park, in Alameda, near your home. And you said, I'm thinking of doing a book about my time with Madden. And I'm like, what? Pick it up from there.
Okay, I will. And the backstory, of course, is that I, in my 40-plus year radio career, spent most of the last 20 working with John Madden. Now, I didn't sit in a booth with him. In fact, I never actually sat next to him for a broadcast, but he was an integral part of a morning radio show on KCBS in San Francisco, which happened to be the third station that he did this on. The first one was one that you worked at way back in the 1980s. And for whatever reason, John kept doing a 5 to 10 to 15 minute every single weekday morning radio hit at a time when he didn't need the money. He really didn't need anything else taking up his life. He was John Madden, the on-air television personality, the ad pitch man, the guy behind the video game, all those things were going on concurrently. And when his time on radio ended in 2018, I then retired in 2021. He died at the end of 2021. And it occurred to me that we had these thousands of recordings, and locked up in those recordings must be some gemstones, some real wisdom, some wit, some teachable moments, whatever you want to call them, all of it in there. And then the question became, How do we get to that? And is there really a book in that? And I think, you and a lot of other friends, I wasn't sure as I got halfway through the process of writing the book, whether you were my friends or my enemies when you said, oh yeah, you should write a book.
Listen, my wife wrote a book. I went through 5 years of that, and that was published a year ago. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And really what was crucial to the process, of course, was having these recordings. But I was trying to answer a question that actually turned out you had one of the keys to, and that was to be able to tell the story of this 1982 to 2018 span of John Madden's life, 36 years, during which he appeared faithfully every morning, little brief time out for some medical crises, but not much, on Bay Area radio. And he started with Gene Nelson, who was your colleague at KYA Radio in San Francisco. And
KSFO.
And KSFO. I mean, it's a long, I have never been able to unravel how those two stations kept swapping call letters, but another whole book, not mine. When Gene retires 12 years later, you'd think that'd be enough. Madden's had a great time. He's hung out with this legendary DJ, Gene Nelson. They meshed. They were amazing together. And that should have been enough. By then, 1994, John Madden, somewhere in there, John had a couple of years where he made more money from CBS Sports than any single player in the NFL.
Wow.
I mean, imagine being that big.
Wow.
Yeah. Still calling in every morning to Gene Nelson to talk. Gene retires. John doesn't quit. He moves over to join another Bay Area broadcast legend, Frank Dill, who happens to be an avid golfer. So there are a lot of Frank Dill, John Madden golf stories. Frank retires 3 years later. There's a brief interlude where a guy replaces Frank that John doesn't get along with. And yet
Who was it? You keep saying that, and you say it in the book. Come on, who was it?
Steve McPartland.
Never heard of him. Okay.
Yeah. He must
no one else.
History. And but apparently he ticked John off enough that John's like, I'm not doing this with this guy. And so my boss for many years at KCBS, Ed Cavanero, who was a real, inside the box kind of guy, thought outside the box and said, you know what? He would be awesome. He would give us an appointment listening moment at 8:15 every morning where people will have to tune in.
And radio, especially a news talk station, and it was mostly news. It wasn't even news talk. It was just news.
Traffic, weather together every 10 minutes. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah.
24/7. Yeah. Appointment radio, explain that.
Yeah, I should explain the term. I mean, in broadcasting, if you have something that people feel they have to tune into, they must tune into. And radio doesn't allow you to time shift it, really. I mean, not like a DVR on television. I'll start the Super Bowl a half hour late and skip the commercials. In radio, you got to be there when it happens. Right. And so 8:15, I mean, we have story after story of people saying I was late to work routinely because I was supposed to be in the office at 8:15, but I couldn't go in until I heard what Madden said. And it immediately, like this, I mean, our ratings during that time slot skyrocketed. We ended up beating our longtime nemesis, KGO. In the morning ratings battle as a result of that hour. And another shout out has to be given to a guy named Frank Oxerart, who was the station manager at KCBS and was willing to go to New York to the suits at corporate and say, hey, this guy's worth it. Pay John Madden whatever it takes. I don't know what it was. I never have known, to be honest with you.
Yeah, right.
To get him on our station because it will change everything. And it did. And so that was the beginning. I came back. So now he's working with Al Hart, another Bay Area broadcast legend, starting in 1997 on KCBS. And they hit it off right away. They were amazing together. But Al retires in 2000. And I had previously worked at KCBS for 10 years, was off doing other stuff. I get a call one day saying, hey, would you consider coming back? And, you remember that scene in the movie Major League where they call Lou Brown. He's running a tire shop. And they say, would you like to manage the Cleveland Indians? And he goes, I got a guy asking me about a set of white walls. I'll get back to you. That was kind of my response. I had other stuff going on. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to everyday radio. But I did say yes. And I know that management must have been terrified that I would be the next Steve McPartland, that I would screw this thing with Madden up by not getting how to play the game with John Madden. So the day before, I'm sorry, Bart, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it wasn't, he was already on KCBS with a different morning person.
That's right, with Al Hart.
Al Hart. Yeah, okay. And your impression in the book, I'm listening to the audiobook. Sure. Your impression of Al Hart is, you nailed it.
Yeah, he's the sweetest, kindest, gentlest, funniest man anybody ever met. There's never been anybody who met Al Hart and said, "Whoa, what a jerk."
No, never. But
Never.
I'm saying the voice. When
Uh-oh.
you do your impression of him on the audiobook, you nailed it.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, that was Al Hart. Oh, no, it's
No,
not.
well, I mean, I learned a lot from him. And so, the day before they're going to put me on the air for the first time when I come back in the summer of 2000, they said, you really need to talk to Coach. We got to get a call. And I know that management is thinking, geez, this has got to work. This has got to work. This has got to work. So I get on the call. And, I'm a little nervous. This is John freaking Madden, right? I've been before. In fact, I didn't really like the Raiders. I used to root against them,
Yeah, right. You grew up on the peninsula or
in San Jose. I happen to be a
49er fan, yeah.
Born in San Francisco. Mom and dad courted at Kezar Stadium. So, I was a 49er fan. And I get on the phone. I just start babbling. I'm like, oh, man, Coach, I just want you to know I'm a big fan of you and your work on television. My dad was a football coach and his dad was a football coach. And I love sports, any kind of sports. And Fred, I must have talked for 3 minutes without stopping. I had a breath. And there's this at the other end, John Madden going, Stan, that's great. Talk to you tomorrow. So, I hope I passed the audition at that point. And the next morning, it's time for the first one. So I get the call from the newsroom, in the intercom saying, okay, Madden's ready on line 7-4. And I thought, okay. So I hit the talk back button and I said, what's the topic? And there's this long silence. And I see people in the newsroom looking back and forth at each other. Finally, somebody has the guts to lean in and go, whatever you want, it's Madden. And that's when it all hit me. This isn't an interview. This is a conversation. That's a different animal.
Huge.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get to your first conversation with Madden on the air, let's back up a little because I have to say I'm listening to the audiobook. I love listening to the audiobook because I've always loved your voice. But you were incredibly generous to me in this book. I was amazed. And I'll honest with you, I was like tearing up going, he's still talking about me. What is going on here? And then at least 2 more times, I'm only on chapter 10 in the audiobook, and at least 2 more times I heard my name. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Why do you keep throwing my name in there?
Well, I'm going to cycle back to your podcast, Fred, because when Coach passed away, my initial thought was, I know a story about John Madden that really isn't being told very much. I was reading all these obituaries about the Ace Hardware ads and the light beer ads and leaving the Raiders sidelines after 10 years. And I mean, every big moment in John Madden's life, but nowhere in any of these obituaries do I see word one about the longest single career of his life, which was morning radio in the Bay Area. And I thought, well, somebody has to tell that story. I look around, I go, well, Gene Nelson's been, kind of out of the picture for years. Frank Dill's not going to write a piece. Al Hart's dead. I guess it's me. And what I didn't know really well was the origin part, the KYA Gene Nelson part. And as I was kind of scraping around looking for information, I ran across your podcast episode where you talked about meeting John at the radio station, about your conversations, where you played one of the answering machine messages that recorded for you and Joanne. And that, I mean, shamelessly, dude, I scraped some of that and put it in the article and quoted you because, I knew you'd be okay with it. But it hit me that I had a trusted friend, somebody I could come to who did know some of the origin myth of John Madden on morning radio. Much later, actually, as the manuscript had already been submitted and gone to almost to the printer, a third party reached out to me and said, would you like to be in touch with Gene Nelson? And I said, well, nobody talks to Gene Nelson. He's kind of, checked himself out of the radio game. And
is he alive?
Yeah. And my contact said, I'll give you a mailing address. So I said, well, that's a start. I'll do something I haven't done in years. I will write an actual letter and put a stamp on it, put it in the mail. And I included my email address, thinking, I don't know if Gene Nelson does email. He's, in his 80s, I guess, and my phone number. And 2 days later, Fred, I got 3 missed calls from Gene Nelson and voicemails. And I'm thinking, I missed, I had the big fish on the line, and I missed him. I finally was able to get back to him couple of days later, and I kind of told him I just wanted to talk to him a bit because I'd already finished the story. I just wanted to make sure that everything you told me about the beginning, sort of jibed, and that maybe I could make this into a little bit of a preamble to the book. And Gene talked to me for about 20 minutes. I was scrambling to record it all and told some hilariously funny stories and stories that mapped to the same experience that Frank Dill and I had with Coach Madden, which then tied the whole thing together for me. Now I knew how it started. I had talked to the guy who started with him, who had the same feelings about working with John Madden that I did. And by the way, had heard some of the same stories, which were as funny in 1982 as they were in 2016, which was kind of Madden's genius too, right? I mean, he never failed to hang on to a good story if he figured he could recycle it and use it again.
Oh, yeah. Always had the narrative going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just briefly, John was on the RKO radio network, and he was recording these 2-minute pieces for RKO radio that were sent on a national basis to the RKO stations. And the director of sports at RKO at the time was Charlie Steiner.
Charlie Steiner, who
went to ESPN.
Yeah.
And is now the radio voice, took over for Vin Scully and is a radio voice for the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Right. He's about to call a World Series as we record this, I think.
Fingers are, the network sure want to see that, of course, right? The two biggest names in the Dodgers and the Yankees, and the Dodgers and the Yankees are the two biggest names. Anyway, so Charlie and I, I would record. John would come into the studio, and we'd record 2 or 3 pieces that were each 2 minutes long, and we got very good at punch editing, like he would read and just pick it up, and I didn't have to edit anything. We just did it live, and he was great at that, and he loved it. It was fun. And then we would talk for 2 hours about all these different things, including my goofy ideas. And he loved it. He just loved that kind of stuff. And I actually, my boss came into me one day after John left, and he said, you can't spend that much time talking to John. You've got work to do. And I said, you want to tell him to leave?
Well, and Fred, that story, and you told me that many years earlier, and I didn't really make all the dot connections until later. And just the other night, a neighbor of mine told me a story about him delivering industrial gases to a hospital here in the East Bay. He's wheeling these canisters of oxygen or whatever in there, right? And he sees John Madden. So he says, well, can I meet him? And somebody says, yeah, sure, come on over. He's a nice guy. He'll talk to you. So my neighbor goes over. Madden says, hey, how you doing, man? And what are you doing here? And Mo, my neighbor, says, oh, delivering cryogenic gases to the hospital. And Madden goes, oh, is that dangerous? I mean, as Mo's telling me the story, I stop him and I go, so he's asking you about you. And Mo's going, yeah. Okay, fast forward. A couple of years later, my neighbor runs into Madden again, I think a charity event, and he gets his moment at the end of the line. He shakes his hand. He goes, we've actually met before, Coach. And Madden looks at him and he goes, cryogenic gases, right?
Whoa.
Right. But he was present if he was having a conversation with you, he wasn't looking over your shoulder to see who was bigger in the corner of the room. He was having a conversation with you, and he cared, and he remembered, which is the crazy part.
Yeah. Yeah. And he, so we did this. I was with him for like almost 4 years. Wow. I even, at one point, Charlie hired me. He says, hey, you're going to have to go out to Madden's house and record him this time. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, just rent some equipment and just go out to his house and record these pieces he's doing about the 1984 Olympics, which will be in Los Angeles, and just get those and send them back down. It's like, okay. So I rent some gear. I drive out to Pleasanton. I pull into the cul-de-sac, and there are his 2 sons, Joe and
Mike.
Mike,
the older one.
Yeah. Playing basketball in the cul-de-sac. Hi, guys. There was no exchange. I walk in the house. I've got this gear over my shoulders, in bags. In those days, you had to carry a lot of gear to do any recording, not like today. And I walk in, and John's sitting on the big lazy boy chair watching TV, and his wife is standing on the kitchen counter. And he's like, hey, Coach. And he goes, Fred, help Virginia. She needs some help putting some stuff away. She's like, no problem, coach. So
It's so mad.
it's so mad. And then I help her out and she's like, thank you. She's reaching down and thank you. And then he goes, all right, she's going to show you what bedroom. Just go in the bedroom and we'll work in there. And I was there for maybe an hour. We recorded some stuff and I left and never, never back at their house again. But in 84, when I went to the Olympics, it was on my birthday and my brother bought us tickets and we went down there. He was there and he said, well, stop by the truck. He was in the production truck and we went in and said hello. And I left the radio station in 86. And so that was pretty much it. I never had a chance to talk to him again, except once when, after all those times where he was telling me, you got to turn that into into a business. That idea, that's a great idea. You got to turn that into a business. And I had multiple things going on that I was popping out of my mouth. And so one of them was starting to work. And it was the radio baseball cards, which I later turned into a podcast that we did. So in 1987, we did 162 episodes of radio baseball cards with Don Drysdale as the host. And John was gracious enough to give me over the phone a testimonial about it. And that was the lead in my demo that I would be sending out to radio stations.
Wow.
Yeah.
And, Fred, the world, it's not full of, but there's quite a tribe of people who, once John identified somebody as trustworthy, honest, loyal, and also talented, because you couldn't just be a hacker with John. In order to get in this inner circle, you had to deliver. But if you could, and all of those things, John would go to the wall for you. He'd make sure that you got that meeting. He'd make sure that somebody read your proposal, whatever it was, because that's the way he operated. I don't think he was out to save the world. I don't think he was trying to, be the center of a Keiretsu, the Madden world thing. But he was just loyal to people who he thought deserved, the opportunity to move on to something better. And many of them did. They were production assistants over the years who became, network executives, largely because John would tell people, this one's smart, pay attention to him or her.
Well, this is a golf podcast. And there are people tuning in to hear about golf. So the one thing I remember, and this was at least a decade before I started playing golf that I was with him, but I do remember him talking about, if I have to choose between golf and tennis, I would much rather be a tennis player, because when you're a bad tennis player, you're done in a half hour. And if you're a bad golfer, you're out there all day long.
This encapsulates the general overarching Madden golf philosophy. When in the book, and there were many, many other episodes that were on the air that didn't make it into the book, he would often talk about exactly that. First of all, none of us are really very good. And I'm speaking to you as a guy with, as of this moment, a 24.4 GHIN index. So that puts me right there.
Oh, no, you don't. Come on. We play a lot closer than that.
I've richly earned it, Fred. Now, but the point being, I'm not a great golfer. I'm not a 30 index, but I'm also not an 18. And I have my moments when, you pure one and you think, I love this game, man.
Yeah.
Plot it out. I cut a little draw, all of that. And then you have moments where you worm burn a fairway wood and you think, what am I doing out here?
Yeah, well, we played a half dozen times together. I love playing with you. I never thought oh my God, here we go again.
Well, I enjoyed playing with anybody, right? Except anybody who doesn't follow. I don't care about the actual rules of the game. I care about the decorum of the game.
Right.
Hey, you're free to play and count whatever you want. I don't care about that.
Nor have I ever asked you, okay, what are we playing for in this game, right? But how much you want to play for? It's like
no, I don't gamble. But for me, anybody who wants to go out and have a good time, be able to laugh at our own foibles, I think I took some of that from John over the years, because I quit the game for a long time. I wasn't getting better. It was taking too long to play. And I'm thinking, like a lot of people in midlife, you get busy, the kids, the job, and all of a sudden golf, 5 hours of it or 6 hours of it just doesn't seem like a really wise investment. And John probably had more time, but he didn't see it as a wise use of his time. So among the other things he'd say is, I don't understand why it's got to be 18 holes. Why can't it be like 11 or 13? Well, guess what? Why can't it? Why can't we have courses that are built in 3-hole modules so you can play 12 or 15?
I've had architects on. We've talked about doing it instead of 2 9s, do 3 6s.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Why don't courses, 18-hole tracks, do a better job of figuring out how to manage starting time so people can play the front 9 or the back 9, not just at dawn, before everybody comes around the turn, but I mean all day long. Why not? And these were kinds of things that John, would talk about all the time, because I think he loved. Well, I know what he also loved, that golf is a great way to get out there and make fun of your buddies, right?
Yeah.
Because, that's what he did. Even his buddy, Dominic Mercurio, who was always just referred to on the air as Dominic. Dominic's a restaurant owner in Monterey. And apparently Dominic, he's not a big guy, but apparently he hits it a ton off the tee. Apparently, I never played with Dominic or John. Dominic doesn't have much of a game after the driver. So John would say, Dominic, he tees it up, and he'll hit it. He hits the hell out of it. And then he goes up and he pulls that tee out of the ground like that, like, take that. And like
then, a sword coming out of the sheath, right?
Yeah. Unplugging the tee from the earth, But then after that, everything goes south. And all Dominic wants to talk about, back in the clubhouse, did you see my drive on 7? And John's go, yeah, but after that, man, everything was horrible. I mean, you scalded your 3-wood into the bunker, then took you 3 to get out of there. And then, so, he approached the game, I think, with an attitude that was, it's not going to get great. You're not going to be great. Why would you get upset at yourself if this is who you are?
Right. And this book is not a biography, right? This is not like the life of John Madden. This is you telling stories of Maddenisms. I don't know what else to call them, right? It just like how things that he said on the air and where it would go and what direction is. And as you stated earlier, it was like, this is a conversation. It's not an interview.
Yeah. And like, the kind of conversation, I know there's a phrase, talking story, where you're just hanging out with people. You're sharing your life story, their life story, the funny thing you saw, the thing you couldn't understand. It's what I love. It's just hanging out and talking. John loved that too. He was an incredible observer, of everything, the world around him, the human condition, all of it. And so he loved to talk about that. So some of it he just was baffled by. Some of it he flat out said, I don't get that. I don't get grits was one that he told me one time. And I shared that with Peyton Manning, who I was able to get to write the foreword for the book.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
He's like, what do you mean he doesn't like grits? I said, I don't know, man. I mean, he's not around to ask anymore. And Peyton's going, no, I'm not down with that, man. I love grits. And I'm going, yeah, me too. And I'm not even from New Orleans and didn't play at the University of Tennessee.
So the foreword in the book is by Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. That is quite a coup.
Well, I have to thank Steve Mariucci for that. Fred, here's a quick backstory. I'd never written a book before.
I know that.
No freaking clue to what it meant to write a book. I pitched one very well-known agent, and her response was, I don't know, John Madden's dead, isn't he? And I said, well, yeah. But I apparently wasn't able to explain what it was I was trying to do with the book.
You didn't have the good elevator pitch going, right?
I don't think I did. Or it was a pitch that didn't fit a narrow box. It wasn't a biography. It wasn't an oral history. It wasn't, whatever. It was just my story about my life with John Madden and why he did radio and the funny stuff and why stuff he said. And
it's so good.
So during the pitch meeting, it's a Zoom call with these editors from Triumph Books. And I can tell they're interested, or else they wouldn't have scheduled the call. And I know they're interested because the publisher is on the call, not just the younger editors. And the questions I'd been anticipating, I'm answering. And then they say, well, who do you think you can get to write the foreword? I was so naive about this whole process. I thought they went and got somebody to write the foreword. I didn't know that was my job as the author.
Oh, wow.
I was that dumb. So I said, well, maybe Tony La Russa, because he's a friend of John Madden's. Well, saying that to a group of book people in Chicago, where Tony had recently flamed out as the manager of the White Sox, and by the way, they're North Siders, not a good move. I can see their faces all dropped.
White Sox twice.
Yeah, right.
Right, and was a competitor in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So not
a North Side Chicago win.
Not a good name.
Right. So okay, now I'm scrambling. I'm thinking, well, maybe Al Michaels, because he'd worked with John, and I had a couple of possible entrees to Al, I thought.
Wow.
Maybe.
Okay.
And then I just threw Peyton's name out. I said, or Peyton Manning. Man, they all lit up. You can get Peyton Manning? I'm going, I'll try it. I got off that call, and I immediately text Steve Mariucci, and I said, Mooch, do you think you could get me to either Al Michaels or Peyton Manning to write a foreword for the book? And Mooch knew about the book in general. And all I got back was, I'll try. And then I didn't hear from him for like 3 months. And I'll try is the shortest communication I've ever had with Mooch.
So wait, give a little backstory on Mooch, because again, golf audience may not know, may not follow the NFL.
So Steve Mariucci from Iron Mountain, Michigan, where his boyhood friend was Tom Izzo, who became the basketball coach at Michigan State and won national championships. So you've got a parallel story there. These two boyhood buddies, and John Madden and his boyhood friend, John Robinson, who won a national championship coaching USC, is in the College Football Hall of Fame. Remarkable, right? Two different pairs from two different parts of the country. Madden and Mariucci meet up. I think Mariucci was the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach with the Packers at the time. John was still doing national broadcasts, and he was just taken by Steve Mariucci. They famously got on the bus one day, the Madden Cruiser, to tour Green Bay. And Mariucci was going to show him where everybody lived. Well, that's where McCarthy lives over there. Brett Favre lives in that house. And then, they're pulling the Madden Cruiser up like in cul-de-sacs in Green Bay and having to back out.
If you've ever been to Green Bay, have you ever spent time there?
Yes.
It is not what you call a big city.
No, pick any suburban neighborhood anywhere and put a football stadium in the middle. That's Green Bay.
It's bizarre because I worked there twice at the stadium. They did a fan festival, and I worked there twice. And you get out of the airport, and to go to the hotel, you cross the street from the airport. Okay, that's not a big deal. And then to get to the stadium, you come out of the parking lot of the hotel, you turn left, you go down about a quarter mile, you turn left at the first signal, you go down another half mile, there's another signal, you turn right, you go a half mile again, and you're at the stadium.
And there's an entire 35,000 seat stadium.
Right? It's an 80,000 seat stadium with 103,000 people in the entire town. So I always figured the best job to have is to break into houses on Sunday because no one's going to be home because they're either at the game or working at the game.
Yeah, just a few out of town guests who didn't like football or whatever. I've never been sure. So anyway, Madden and Steve Mariucci, and Mariucci that day has brought with him a bag full of pasties, Cornish pasties, which are meat pies that were brought over to America by the Cornish miners who populated the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And Iron Mountain, Mariucci's hometown, has got a lot of that heritage. Mariucci's heritage is Italian. Madden eats one of these, and he's smitten. He's a great mooch. He probably ate 3 or 4 or 8 of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
And there begins a bond, which then begins to include bocce, which Steve Mariucci is into. He gets Madden engaged in it. Madden now starts to play bocce. What they came up with was the world's greatest fundraiser, with all due deference to every way too long golf scramble fundraiser anybody ever suffered through. A day at the bocce tournament is better because guess what? You're not out all day. Your matches last 30 minutes. In between, eating, drinking, and hanging out. It would be as if after every shot on the scramble, you could eat, drink, and hang out instead of waiting back to the clubhouse for the auction, right? And so they turned this thing into a multi-million-dollar fundraiser.
Wow.
And of course, engage people who bocce is kind of easy to learn, a lot easier to learn than golf.
Yeah.
And so, that became the nucleus of their relationship and friendship. And Steve Mariucci coached, he was the head coach at University of California, then for the San Francisco 49ers. Then he had a job with the Detroit Lions, and I'm forgetting whether he was head coach or general manager or whatever. And then he's now working on the NFL Network as an analyst. And he's really one of the best because he's enthusiastic and smart and doesn't take himself too seriously.
Right. And so he led you to Peyton Manning? Did he came through?
What he finally did, months go by. Thanks for keeping me on track, by the way. I can tell you're a professional. Months go by, and I've not heard from him, and I thought, I'm screwed. Now I'm trying to reach out to my third level sources on Al Michaels, and that isn't working. And one day I get like 3 texts and 3 missed calls from Mariucci. Stan, Peyton will do it. You got to get a hold of him right away. And so I reached out to the number for Peyton's assistant that Mooch gave me. She was awesome. She said, here's how it's going to work. Peyton will give you about 20 minutes on the phone. Then you'll write it up and you'll send it over for approval and he'll approve it, whatever changes need to be made, and then you go.
Perfect.
Well, I kind of cheated because I kind of wrote it a little bit in advance, just trying to pull in a few of the threads that were in the book. And also, I wanted to make sure, Omaha and things like that were in there, right? So I did. And then I had the call with Peyton, and he told me a few more things that that weren't out there in the public sphere, including talking about a photo that he keeps on his desk at his office outside of Denver, with him and Matt. Oh. And the two of them, I might be able to, but anyway, it's in the book. And when it turns out, I thought, well, that's a personal photo. And I was seeking permission from Peyton to use it. Oh, yeah, you can use it. My editor at Triumph Books does some digging and says, well, no, actually, that's a crop out of a 4-shot of John and Peyton and Phillip Rivers of the Chargers and whoever else was on the broadcast in Indianapolis. Peyton's like skinny, back when he was still with the Colts, looking at John like puppy dog, looking at Coach Matt. And anyway, I write up the foreword. I send it to Peyton. Honest to God, Fred, it's like 5 minutes. I get a response from Emily, the assistant, saying, Peyton says it's great. There are a couple of things he thinks you didn't get quite right. Can you? So I send it right back. 5 more minutes. Peyton says it's good. He loves it. And then for our worldwide launch event, I thought, man, it would be great if we could have Peyton there. Peyton's not going to be there. But what if we'll just get Peyton to record a video? Same thing, 5 minutes. Peyton says he'll do it. Just send him
or outgoing answering machine message.
Yeah. Just send him a script. And, I did. And you were at the event. Peyton nailed it, brought down the house.
Nailed it.
And he's an important figure in this whole John Madden story, because I think he is the heir to John's mantle as sort of the soul and conscience of pro football. He loves the game dearly. He's also a new generation version. But if there had been an opportunity to do a Peyton Manning cast back when John Madden was starting, John Madden would have done the Madden cast.
Oh, he would have loved that.
Right? He would have killed, right? Can you imagine you or me or anybody just sitting with John doing what Peyton and Eli do, on the sidelines of a broadcast? John would have been great at it. But John was great at all the other stuff he did do. Peyton's just a new version, I think. I listen, Troy Aikman, to me, when I'm listening to him, I'm like, I hear Madden in him. Well, there are two guys. John loved Troy Aikman. During the years when Troy was playing, I know he helped Troy with the beginnings of his broadcast career. John had a kind of a short list of these people. He just identified them. Troy, Peyton, Brett Favre, who I know has fallen out of favor in a lot of ways, but John and Brett Favre really got along quite well. Andy Reid and John are like this, there's a list of them. Ron Rivera, the former Cal linebacker, coached in the NFL. I mean, these are people that John just identified as good people. He would always say about somebody, he's one of the good ones. And that's high praise, one of the good ones.
I mentioned that I've been listening to the audiobook and listening to your voice, and you break into Madden all through the book, and you really get good at it. As the book progresses, you're getting better and better through it.
I started out at 0 because I didn't think I was going to have to read the Madden parts. I thought they would surely hire somebody else with a different voice.
So, is it okay for me to ask you why in the audiobook, you've got hours and hours, hundreds of hours of audio of you and John, that it's not in the audiobook?
When I started the project, I assumed that were there to be a book contract at all, in an audiobook in particular, that we would just port the audio that I had over into the book. I used the transcriptions of the audio to write the book. But what it turned out was that there had been an arrangement between the Madden estate and Hollywood, basically, for the rights to all things John Madden to be licensed. And, there were at least a couple of movie projects, one for sure, big one, and then some documentary stuff underway.
Wow.
That I don't know that the radio stuff will ever appear in these things, but it might, right? So it was made clear to me that the audio would be off limits. We might be here and there for personal appearances, but to commercialize it in that way wasn't going to happen. So kind of not my problem at that point. I thought, okay, I'm not a big audiobook consumer. I don't mean any disrespect to those who are. I just like to hold a book. And maybe I listen to too much audio over my years of radio, but especially myself. And so fast forward to this past July, the book is only 3 months away from publication. And I get an email. I'm in France at the time from my publisher's office and saying, oh, we've just about wrapped up negotiations with the audiobook publisher, Recorded Books, and they would like you to read the book. I thought, oh, kind of hoping it would be Tom Hanks or Matthew McConaughey or,
No, you're better.
Anyway, so I said, okay. The day comes and I reached out to the producer of the audiobook saying, can you find somebody else to read the Madden part? I recommended our mutual friend, Mike Sugarman, who has a little bit different voice from ours.
Yes,
I thought could read the Madden part without trying to do a Madden impression, just read them in a voice and tone that were a little different from mine.
No.
I think probably that's just not how they do it. Maybe a budget thing. I don't know. So I get into the recording studio and I'm thinking, well, surely there'll be a director here or a producer to kind of, say, try this, a little more of that. I want you to feel this. No, it's my recording engineer.
I've produced a couple of audiobooks, my wife's and another one. And the other one was, I had a producer here and I had to build out my studio and, to make sure it worked right. And this, she goes over every single word to make sure you get it right because there's a lot of people who listen to audiobooks and read along the book.
Oh no!
So you can't diverge from what's on the printed page. You've got to be exact on what's on the printed page.
Wow, this is amazing. Well, when I got there was a 2024 version of Fred Green in the 1980s. I've got a recording engineer in the studio. He's a terrific young guy, and he's very, very diligent. He catches my mistakes, and I'm just trying to kind of channel my grandpa reading to the grandkids style because I've never done this. And then, without really thinking about it, I hit the first Madden quote and all I could do is kind of try to maybe be a little different and get back to reading the story.
Right.
So I kind of thought, I figured it took 2.5 days to record 8.5 hours.
It's exhausting.
It's
hard work.
Hard freaking work. So
even for a broadcast veteron like you,
man,
it's hard work.
Yeah, Fred, a long stretch for me would be 30 seconds of speaking at a time. So I'm not. It's not like a podcast where you got to talk all this time, right? So I assume they're going to send it off to Recorded Books, and somebody back there is going to go, "Oh no, go back to square one." As it turned out, they asked me to come in and do like 5 little pickups, where I'd obviously gotten the wrong word, and now I realized because it was going to be the word that somebody was reading in the book. And that was it. And I haven't heard it yet.
Oh, wow.
I've
really?
got calls from people who've been listening. They've been enjoying it. And I'm
telling you.
I'm honored by that.
Well, first of all, I'm really enjoying the audiobook. I do like audiobooks, but I'm a podcast guy. So early on in Golf Smarter's life, I had Audible as a sponsor. And the research started coming out that people who listen to audiobooks don't listen to podcasts, and people who listen to podcasts don't have time to listen to audiobooks. They're very time consuming, and you find yourself, like when you're in an audiobook or even in a podcast series, you find yourself doing things where you can stretch out time to be able to listen for long periods of time. Right?
I saw one of my neighbors driving around the block 3 times the other day, and maybe
listening to a podcast. That was a podcast.
It was a podcast. It had to be. I'm sure it was called Smarter, but
no, it was not.
Let's say it was.
But let me just say, in the book, the hardcover book, it's hardcover only at this point.
So far, yeah.
The way
it works, I guess downstream, if it does well enough, then a softcover paperback.
That would be a beautiful thing, and it's really awesome to see on the side cover here, just to see your name with Madden. It's like so cool, man.
No.
But I can't tell you how flattered I am, because in the section that has, in the middle of the book, there's a section of photos. And the first photo is the one of me and John. I was so flattered, and I was like,
I insisted that they lead. Well, here's another interesting point about writing a book. Again, something I didn't know. I got to supply my own photos. Now, there it is. I can't
this
photo It says so much. I mean, it first of all pulls back the thread of the story that we told early in the book about your relationship with John and the radio station. But here's big goofy Madden and nice.
My Hebrew. Yeah. Or as a friend said to me recently, whoa, you had dark hair? It's like,
I know.
Go to your room. What do you mean I had dark hair? Both of us.
Like in the zeros, and somebody wrote into the show one time and said, the guy with the white hair. And I'm going, whoa.
I know. It's like, oh, yeah, that's me.
Yeah. But yeah, I learned that you got to supply your own photos. And so fortunately, I had two different friends who'd shot a lot of Madden events. And one of them, wanted some compensation, which I don't blame him for. The other one was fine with it, not being compensated. They were willing to go out and license a couple of photos.
Nice.
So I know that there was a higher budget for this book than many of the other books that friends I've come across have written, where they literally had to go pay their own, licensing fees for photos if they want those in the book. So, I mean, I feel really fortunate about that. This publisher, Triumph Books, they do a lot of titles around sports. They've been really great to work with. And, everybody, I haven't heard a bad word about them from other authors who've worked with them. So, you've got a great book waiting to be written about sports, pitch them.
Okay. Well, there is an entire chapter in the book dedicated to golf.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Fred, I probably could have done too. As I was sorting out all of these thousands of recordings, they're all transcribed. So now I've got this massive database of text.
Wow.
Separated by each air date. So I knew when a given show had aired because we'd recorded or we'd saved them under a file name that had the air date. But now where do you start? This is a big haystack. Where are all the needles? So I began to kind of organize themes that I remembered him talking about. And golf was right at the top of that list.
Wow.
Talked about golf a lot. And he loved attending the AT&T, Pebble Beach Pro-Am. He became very good friends with Davis Love III, who he loved not just as a golfer, but as a guy to hang out with, because DL3 apparently really, really liked to eat. And if you really, really like to eat,
you're friends with John Madden.
You're in John Madden's corner. And so, these stories, there were stories about him, fighting his way around the course down at Pebble Beach. He had all of his secret hideaways. You got to remember, he was doing that back in the 80s. So things hadn't quite as exploded, on the PGA Tour the way they have now. The money was still pretty good money, but it was a different world, like everything was, I guess, in the 80s. Yeah. And so there's stories about him, gawking at guys at the driving range and thinking equipment is the answer. This will fix everything. And then realizing, it's not the answer. But they sure sell a lot of equipment, don't they? Those were observations that, anybody who's been afflicted by golf, I think all of us who play the game, whatever level we play it at, I mean, I guess there might be some people way up at the top who don't get the inherent weirdness of golf. But if you play the game the way most of us play, golf's weird. I mean, who goes out there with a stick and tries to hit a round thing all the way down there? And then the miracle of being able to do it even in 5 strokes on a par 4 to go from here to all the way there into a little cup. It's insane. Who invented this thing? Why do we do it? It's all great. And John just laughed about all that.
I've just come to realize, I've said this for years. It's like the ball, it's the hardest sport I've ever played. And the ball's just sitting there.
Yeah.
Right? It's not even moving. But I just realized recently, if it moves, you're completely freaked out.
Oh, yeah. Well, John, one of John's favorite things was to say, in golf, they tell you got to be perfectly still and stand up. That's the opposite of every other sport I've ever played, where you got to get down low and be moving, right?
And you and many people could go on and on and on about John. But there's 2 things that I want to bring up. One, you kind of under your breath, listening to you, read the book, but it's your voice. You mentioned that you and your wife did this 11,000-mile road trip. Yeah. I don't know about this. When did this happen and how did it happen? Now, let me just say that going to the book launch event the other night, which was fantastic and I loved it, and great seeing people that I hadn't seen in many years. One of them, which was your wife, who I haven't seen since college.
Is that right?
I don't think I've seen her since college. And I walked up to her and she looks at me, she goes, I recognize you. And I said, Fred Green. She screamed, she blurted out, oh my God, I can't believe. And then we joked about how when I knew her, when we were in our early 20s, that, we kind of looked alike. And I'm like, oh, no. The pictures that I've seen of your son as a teenager looks exactly like I did as a teenager.
Quite true. It's very weird. I don't even want to get that deeply into genealogy, so I'm afraid I'm going to find out that I'm related to you, which would ruin everything.
Actually, my real last name is Bunker.
Well, so as I was nearing retirement, and this was now in COVID, my last day on the air was in June of 2021. So everything was kind of weird. We'd gone through a year and a half of weird at that point. And John always had a phrase. John always would say, if you say you're going to retire, you've already retired. He didn't understand a farewell tour of an athlete saying, this will be my last season. And then, getting the keys to the Corvette and the fishing boat and all that at every ballpark around the league. In John's mind, you ran through the finish line every year, and then you took stock. And if that stock taking led you to decide that's it, then you walked away. And he did that with the Raiders, and he did it again with NBC at the end of his television career. So that was always a kind of a back of my mind joke. If you say you're going to retire, you've already done it. Well, I sent word to him that I was going to retire. By then, he'd already stopped doing radio, so I'd see him once in a while when I'd go out to watch football games. We texted from time to time. I'd get a message out of nowhere from John, and
That's sweet.
It was.
That's awesome.
And so I told him, my wife and I had decided, and I think June of 21, COVID had drove a lot of the decision. Let's just get in the car and drive around the country and catch up with friends and family we haven't seen, in some cases in many years. See places we've never seen, like the Deep South and the Blues Trail and Memphis, and our friend Ted Robinson, the great Emmy Award-winning sports announcer. His wife Mary grew up on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and still has a home there, and they would retire to that home every summer, retreat to it, I guess. And so we said, we talked about it for years. Let's go spend some time with Ted and Mary up at, Lake Michigan. Anyway, we did all this, stopped in Green Bay, took a photo outside the stadium, sent it to John, sent it to Mooch, and 11,000 miles later. But along the way, before I left, John texted me and said, before you go on the trip, read Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. And that he had always said that book and the notion of seeing America, in Steinbeck's case with his poodle Charlie, with his pickup camper, while he was already, I think he might have already had the Nobel Prize by then. I mean, this was John Steinbeck wasn't a beginner when he did this, helped John Madden see a way of seeing America, get out and talk to real people. And Virginia, it turns out, John's widow, was either an English or creative writing major at Cal Poly, and Steinbeck was her specialty. She's a collector of Steinbeck books. So I wrote back to Coach, and I said, well, I read Travels with Charlie a long time ago, Coach. And he wrote right back, read it again. So I thought, all right, I bought a copy. And my deal was every night on the trip, I would read a chapter or some of a chapter before going to bed. And often I would text Coach. My wife did all the driving, by the way. Also important to know.
Wow.
She prefers to do the driving. I'm all right with it. I like to drive, but I'm good with having the iPad and the navigation in my lap. And, hey, what's that on the roadside? I can look it up and tell her what it was. So, fast forward to, nearly the end of the trip, we're coming into New Orleans, and I just was finishing the book. And what I had forgotten about the end of Travels with Charlie is the last chapter, I think, is the story of, and I believe it's Ruby Bridges, the young black girl who, was desegregating a lily white school, and the vicious racism that was going on in New Orleans and in the South at that time, Steinbeck writes about vividly. I'd forgotten that from my earlier reading of the book. I'd kept the gauzy, hazy memories of, roadside America. And then it all snapped together, because what Coach was telling me was there's an important message in this book beyond roadside America. And, that speaks of who John was. I mean, John, he didn't care what color you were, what gender you were, any of that.
No.
If you fit John's model of what a good human being is, you were in. And, and the Raiders.
He was a teacher. I mean, he started out as a teacher.
Yeah, it's possible to see a version of John Madden's story and Virginia's story that ends at, Nipomo Middle School down there in the Central Coast of California with a long career as the PE coach, and Virginia becomes the principal. I think in that version of the story, I don't think John's the principal, or maybe Virginia's the superintendent. But that could easily have been the way this thing came out. Because there was never any intention to become everything he became.
Yeah. So I hate wrapping up on something that's not part of the book, but because I really want people to read this book. I hope you have a great success with this. Again, it's called Mornings with Madden: My Radio Life with an American Legend by Stan Bunger. What didn't you briefly mentioned this earlier? What didn't make it into the book?
Well, there are probably 100 iterations of other stories that fit within the silos. The golf chapter, the dogs chapter, the eating chapter that didn't make it in. What got left out, a lot of what got left out, Fred, to be honest, was just the day-to-day stuff that at the time seemed kind of important. Oh, a new contract or somebody got traded, or who's going to start sports news, right? But you know what? The fact that
sports news,
right? Even if it had been news, a lot of it was stuff that, guess what? A month or there's a lesson there, right? This is just today's stuff. It's going to go away. What sticks? What matters? What's eternal? I guess the literal answer to what didn't make it into the book would be John's appearance with us on the morning of 9/11, where he was in New York City at the Dakota, where he had an apartment. Mm-hmm. And, we're in our wall-to-wall coverage of this incredible real-time tragedy. I'm doing this myself at the radio station, pulling in feeds from here and there, trying to keep an eye on live video feeds. And 8:15 comes up, and I probably didn't even know it had come up. And at some point, somebody in the newsroom said, I assume we're not doing Madden today because, well, and I think I might have first said, yeah, we're too busy. And then I don't know whether somebody reminded me he was in New York, or if I said, wait, he's in New York and he can do this. And they said, yeah, he's ready. So we put him on. And what he had done, of course, was gone down to the street and walked around on the Upper West Side and seen people covered with soot and ashes, fleeing with horror on their, and he told that story on the radio in a way that, not a trained journalist, just the world's greatest storyteller. And, the reason it's not in the book is it never got saved. The recording system we had at the time would record at 8:15 for about 15 minutes. And since we didn't do it right at 8:15, it didn't get recorded. Everybody was running around crazy that day and nobody thought to hit record anywhere. I keep living with the hope that somewhere there's some radio junkie who somehow recorded this, or maybe like in that movie Contact, where the message the broadcast comes back from space 100 years later or whatever, that this John Madden, which to me, it's the most unlike John Madden thing of all the things John Madden ever did, but the most John Madden thing John Madden ever did. Tell a story in real time with empathy and with precision. Doesn't get any better.
Wow. And you said something in the book. I need to slap your wrist on this one. You said you were jealous of me. You said you were jealous of me out of college.
Oh yeah.
And here we are 50 years later, dude, and you became the star. You were a Bay Area legend, and in the Radio Hall of Fame here in the Bay Area, they don't recognize production guys who are only there for a decade. I was gone. I left radio after a decade, but still, you became the star. So you want to talk about jealous?
Well, Fred, thank you. The truth is, I was a kid who read everything he could get his hands on, asked too many questions, and never shut up. And, guess what? They'll pay you to do that, it turns out. So, I was super lucky. I knew where I came from. But I was quite jealous of you early on because, we left college in 1977, and I set out into all these small towns where I was making literally $450 a month, I think, at one of my first jobs. And you were working in San Francisco. And I'm thinking, God, if I could just get to Sacramento, because, the radio game was played by market size. I never thought, I'll stay here in South Lake Tahoe, great place to live, but I mean, they didn't pay much in radio. Meanwhile, my friend Fred and my other friend Jim, our other running mate from college and occasional golf buddy, we're working in San Francisco. And I just thought, well, these guys have got it. I screwed up. So I was a little jealous.
No, man. Like when people tell me, oh, my son's graduating college and he got a job at Google. It's like, no. You want to end up at Google. You don't want it to be your first job.
Fred, there's something to that. And that's why it's so much fun to do this with you, because what I do honor about your career is, going back to Madden. Let's circle that back. Never work a day in your life if you can help it, right? But more importantly, find your passion and then let that follow. And you've done this, through all of your various endeavors. I mean, the fantasy play-by-play one was my all-time favorite.
I do.
Radio booth and pretend you're the broadcaster and walk away with a tape. Oh, by the way, Fred gets paid when you do it. This was just genius stuff. And the fact that you're still passionate about communicating, and the podcast is awesome. I mean, I love the fact that you ranged over all of everything that's golf adjacent, right? And if you love golf, well, okay, let's spin from that. Anyway, kudos to you for sticking with it, and in this 28,000th episode.
Oh, all right. Again, the book, Mornings with. Please buy it. Please help my friend out.
The great news is I didn't set out to make any money, and every author I've met recently said, don't expect.
Yeah. And I tell people all the time, you want to do a podcast? Don't do it for the money.
Right.
So the book is called Mornings with Madden, My Radio Life with an American Legend, by my old friend and golf buddy, Stan Bunger. Stan, thanks so much, and congratulations.
Brett, thanks so much for having me. Continued success to you.
Of course, I'll leave a link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. And don't forget the audiobook, which I listen to and is also very entertaining. Thanks go out this week to Nick Frumlack from Sarvor, PA, who received all 3 gifts for recording this week's episode intro. You too can become a Golf Smarter ambassador just like Nick and receive all 3 free gifts by either opening a future episode or leaving an honest review from wherever you follow Golf Smarter. As you probably know from your own experience, listener reviews are the single greatest way to discover new podcasts. If you write a review, make sure you send me an email telling me where I can find it and what you said. And once we confirm that, I'll get back to you with all of your gift details. Some great questions are coming in about our upcoming Golf Smarter adventure to the Robert Trent Jones Trail next March. Really hope you can join me for 3 beautiful rounds of golf between March 26th to the 30th, 2025, just outside of Birmingham, Alabama. Of all of the work that Tara and Alan of TMI Golf did to research and book this trip, one of the most compelling elements is that during the entire stay, we're only in one location, the alluring Renaissance Birmingham Ross Bridge Golf Resort and Spa. Please check out all the details, pricing, and itinerary at tmigolf.com/golfsmarter. That's tmigolf.com/golfsmarter, and get back to me with any other questions that you may have, or make sure that you put in your reservation. Have you ever heard of the aim point putting system? Sure you have, because it's been so successful on the tour, and with all of us recreational golfers too. Well, this Friday on Golf Smarter Mulligans, we go back into our archives for the first of a 2-part conversation from January of 2013 with the creator of Aim Point, Mark Sweeney. In part 1, we'll get the full orientation and learn that its introduction was not an obvious slam dunk.
Golf Channel picked up Aim Point in January of 2007. And, I told my wife in December of 2006, I said, if they don't pick this up, I'm done. I'm out. Because I'd already kind of been through CBS and NBC, and they were really the last network. The problem with TV is there's only really 3 people to choose from. You have 3 customers, and if they all say no, then you're done. You're out of business. And I was literally within days of just giving up and moving on.
Could you have really walked away from it?
At that point, yeah. Well, at that point, I loved it, but if there's no business for it, you're starved to death. If I couldn't prove a legitimate business, it was time to move on, like it or not. came down to really a couple days and around Christmas of 06. And Golf Channel didn't say, hey, great, we'll do this 3-year deal. They said, we'll do it one tournament.
That's part one with Mark Sweeney, this Friday, arriving right here on the same feed you get each week for Golf Smarter. Now, we're doing some heavy lifting on our website right now. It's a mishmash of things, and my web developer is just had it with me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to redirect you to our distributors page that provides the complete list of all of our available episodes. It's at golfsmarterpodcast.com. But if you have any questions about our adventure, updates on how your game is going,